Hi, Laura Donnelly here with The Healing Path, and I'm the founder of Dancing with Ease, Body Brain Balance, Peak Performance. So the Healing Path is one I think that we're all on all the time, moving and growing and learning. And it's not the same for everybody. And one of the wonderful things about it is that it's always happening. Healing is always happening, even when we don't feel like it is happening. It's happening inside of us. And there are probably as many modalities for healing as there are people on the earth. And the Healing Path is just a place where you can learn more about different modalities and maybe be inspired to find a new way of working, a new path to explore. And the main thing that we share, the people that I have conversations with on the Healing Path, the main thing we share is that healing starts with an intention inside of ourselves to heal. And then we find the right people, we find the right modalities, we find the right medicine, we find the right herbs, we find the right exercise program, whatever it is, the intention, I'm going to allow healing to happen in my life, opens a door and things just happen. And today's door, I'm so excited, is Emily Ridout. She was here before as a guest and speaker, and she's got some new stuff happening. And we thought we'd try something a little bit different today. So I'm going to bring Emily in so she can say hello and give a little bit of history about herself. Hey, Emily.
Hi, Laura. Thanks for having me on.
I'm so happy you can come back. It's always joyful to talk to you.
It's always a delight to talk to you too. And yeah, I'm excited to work with your group. I really loved the interactions we had the first time. And for people who are new to me, I am an Astro-Yoga specialist and an astrologer. And what that means is I help people figure out how to use their bodies and their spirits and their actions that they take to move into deeper and fuller alignment with who they truly are. And whenever we move into alignment with who we are at our cores, we start to act from a place of authenticity, and healing becomes really possible. And so sometimes it even becomes effortless once you get into the good habit of being your most powerful, in tune self.
It is like being on a slippery slide, and you almost can't stop it from happening.
It's true. It's like relaxing into a place of feeling good, right? Like you're no longer grasping for what you want in life or wishing things were different. You relax into a state of your own highest embodiment. And then seemingly without effort, things start to happen. Now, of course, it takes a little effort. You have to get yourself lined up with yourself. And if you've gone down pathways that were not attuned with you, there might be some stickiness as you disengage from particular paths and move down ones that feel better. But ultimately, it starts to be easier and easier.
It does. And it's not that we don't make missteps. And sometimes I have learned more on my own healing journey, getting myself out of a quagmire that I put myself into.
It's true. Challenges can be there to open new passageways or alert us, right? Things manifest externally as troubles that alert us to how to get back into alignment. And so this stuff is all about reading those, not as they externally appear, which could be like a big monster in the room, right? But as they appear energetically, so that we can redirect into a better and better place. So it really takes away any of the guilt, the fear, the shame about a situation, and it puts the power back in your court. It puts you back in the driver's seat to say, okay, that happened, acknowledging it, mourning it if you need to, but you have the power to go somewhere else from here. So do you want to stay or do you want to go?
Right, that choice. And part of that choice is knowing more about yourself, knowing more about what motivates you. What do people sometimes say? Well, I'm kind of fast. I think fast. A lot of times I talk fast. A lot of times I skip 2 steps and I'm suddenly talking at my next idea, at the conclusion of the idea, and people are like, wait, we were just talking about this over here, and now you're over here, and what happened? And for me, it's like totally normal, because I kind of zipped through all these things in my head and came out with the conclusion. And it took me a little while in my life to learn how to slow down, not throttle, right? Not throttle my energy, but not to be so excited about my idea that I talked 90 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Because then what would happen is people would get confused. They didn't want to listen to me, that whatever, they were too much noise, too much talking, too much speed. Like even when I think about it, you can hear my voice speed up. So when I come back to myself, I'm like, oh, wait, okay. So I can still be really excited. And I can just take a breath. That's not throttling my energy. That's nurturing my body by taking a breath. And then I can have space to engage with somebody. So is there something, since I sent you my birth time and my place of birth and everything, that indicates that kind of hyper energetic speed?
Yes, I actually just pulled up your chart. I wonder if I can share my screen.
Yeah, I might have to. There's a share down there at the bottom.
Let's see.
If you don't have that, I can maybe do that.
It's allowing. I think it's allowing me to. Let's see if it
does.
Oh no, my internet browser says it doesn't agree. So I won't share the screen, but I will just describe your chart then verbally, which is fine, I think, because I'm not sure if everyone will be able to make sense of it visually. So perhaps verbally is the best road anyway. So Laura, what you just described does show up in your chart. It's cool too, because it's a fairly complex formation. And so, and it interacts with what I see as being one of the 2 hallmark formations in your chart.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So you know that your sun is in Leo, and you might even know that you're a Capricorn or you're a Cancer rising. Are you aware of that?
Oh,
and of course,
my dad was a Cancer, right? So it's kind of funny for me that my dad's birth sign, right, is my rising sign. I just thought that was interesting.
You can see family dynamics in charts. So like if you looked at a whole extended family, you'd be able to trace the lineage through those charts. So it does often happen, things like that. I know my father, my brother, and I have the exact same degree ascendant. So that's a 1 in 360 chance.
Wow.
And so you look at that and you're like, oh, there's our family resemblance, among other things, right? So your Cancer rising is, the hallmark of people with Cancer rising is they are caring. And the way they flip out in life, right, is by caring too much for others and forgetting to care for themselves. And so, the way that this life goes for you is going to be driven by what you actually care about and how you feel. So your emotions, more so than many other signs, are going to be the thing that show you the way forward. Now, this gets a little tricky, right? Because emotions occasionally come from our subjective realities rather than sort of a clear-cut understanding of things. Nevertheless, as you experience things, the clue as to whether this is a good situation for you or a bad situation for you is going to come through your emotions. And your moon, which is your chart ruler, is in Aries in the 10th house. So the way that you're actually going to feel like yourself the most is by showing up for others in a way that is embodying leadership qualities and that is actually being driven by your own will. So not the will of someone else saying this is the way you heal or this is the way that goes, right? But you actually being self-directed, which of course we see reflected in you having a healing modality as a career, because you have Pisces at the midheaven, which has some healing mixed with spiritual aspects. So healing in a psychosomatic plane. Into Aries, which is, of course, you've self-started and directed these wonderful groups. So that's a piece of it, that Aries moon, and that is going to be wanting to move quickly. The Aries moon is in a formation known as a grand trine, which is a highly beneficial formation that makes energy move very, very quickly, like almost instantaneously, right? You flip on the light switch, the light is on. That's this one. And it's a very interesting one. It's a fire grand trine, which is an even faster moving grand trine. Yet it's with the moon, your chart ruler, with Uranus in the second house, which rules your inner anarchist, the piece of you that's like, let's just throw a wrench in it. Let's just like cause the surprise. And then Saturn, which is the inner rule monger who doesn't want to throw a wrench in things, who wants things to be structured, to have proper boundaries. And so this grand trine is talking to you in terms of essentially the overarching view of your career. One is at the cusp of the 6th house. So what is the structure you put in place every day to achieve what you want to do? The moon is at the 10th house, which is the overall mark in the world. So the mark you're giving out to others, your ultimate stance in life, which is you're a leader for nurturing and healing, right? And then over here in the 2nd house is Uranus, which means you want to have freedom and sovereignty over your finances and resources to direct them as you see fit. So that's all going on. And then like the other piece of what you said, and this is where that mental aspect of speaking about it comes from, is you have one of the smartest Mercuries, and it is in Virgo.
Wow.
Now, it's not just by itself, though. It's actually conjunct Venus, which means that you probably are able to speak with love. And so people probably are able to follow you if you do speak very quickly. They're probably like, okay, well, I didn't catch how we got to the new exciting place, but I can tell it's coming from a good place. And it's in Virgo. So with Virgo, sometimes Virgo people, the hallmark of them is that they're able to arrange things to make things wonderful. Now, the pitfall of that is if you realize that you are able to make things wonderful and you can see how it could be better, sometimes it can make an eye for criticism rather than an eye for celebration, right? And in yoga teaching, we always say the first step, if you're critiquing a student, if you're working with a group, is look for the good, right? So even if they're doing nothing right in terms of structure or whatever, which is rare, people are always doing a lot more right than wrong. You celebrate what is, right? Wow, we all are showing up. We all actually care enough to be here. That's a huge thing, right? Who cares if your foot is not in the perfect angle for the perfect alignment? Like, we'll get to that later. And so the Virgo quality, the trick with yourself, especially because with Cancer rising, sometimes the self-love is reflected last, is to remember to be as kind and as loving to yourself as you are to others. And if you are looking at yourself, to always remember to look for the good first, right? To be like, okay. And then if you're like, and we could improve here and here and here, which of course is a very healer mentality, right? You're like, okay, you feel good, but how do you feel great? Then you can work with that once you're already in that good place of love.
It's very interesting because, like I started out my life in dance as a ballet dancer, and that's hypercritical, and dance class, they give you corrections, right? They don't give you what you did good. And the more corrections you get, that means the better you did, because the teacher sees potential in you and is refining all this stuff. So I really had that too heavy on that side early in my life, in terms of being able to, well, I could never see the good in what I was doing, really, in the beginning. I could only see what wasn't good enough, what wasn't good, I wasn't tall enough, wasn't thin enough, my feet didn't point good enough, I just had a whole litany. And one time somebody said to me, like, well, maybe you could just be a little easier on other people. And I just flipped out, and I'm like, well, I'm just half as hard on them as I am on myself. And she goes, maybe you could be a little easier on yourself. And that probably took me about 10 years to learn.
Yeah.
The native energy of that, and just how the career I picked and how I happened to be raised up in terms of a family of perfectionists, oh my heavens, really, I can see how it emphasizes that in a slightly unbalanced way.
Right. And also having Saturn, which we spoke about briefly, on the cusp of the 6th house. The 6th house rules what you do every day, so your work, right, and whatever. But it also rules your health in a big way, and how you feel about your body sometimes as well. There's some other places. The body's complicated, so it shows up a couple different places. But with Saturn there, Saturn is the rule monger and is also really into perfection. And so Saturn might make you feel like, oh, what I am isn't good enough, right? That's the lie of certain placements. And so with Saturn there, the trick is to actually create positive boundaries and structures around yourself instead of hypercritical or constrictive ones, or having no boundaries, right? Where you're just, somebody else is making the rules, so that you can, create the structure, like a safe place, right? You can either use Saturn to build yourself a cage or a beautiful home. And ideally, it's a beautiful home.
I think that this is one of the really important things, is that everything you're talking about has two sides, but it's the same thing. Mm-hmm. So you can't get rid of one without getting rid of the other. And so it's more how you work with the energy.
Yes, exactly. So the same energy can build your heaven or build your hell, right? And it's like tuning the instrument, right? All of these things happen in vibrationally attuned frequencies. So people talk about being high vibration or low vibration. Literally in music, right? The lower notes have a slower frequency and the higher notes have that higher, but they're harmonic to each other. So mathematically they are related. And the same thing happens with how we embody the different energies in our charts. So which means often the very thing that you're like, gosh, this is tricky, can lead you to the path of your deepest healing and your highest potentialities. I'd love to bring up one other thing I see happening in your chart right now, if it's okay.
Sure.
So there's a very complicated thing going on right now in astrology, and I won't get too deeply into it, but it's a double T square. It has to do with an eclipse, and it's really on the Scorpio to Taurus to Aquarius energetic continuum and square to that. So for you, one of these two T-square placements, which is dealing with transiting Uranus and Mars and Saturn again, Saturn's kind of a theme here, are affecting your lunar nodes. And this is, I think anybody who's listening to this would do well to learn about their lunar nodes, because they're 2 points in the chart and they're opposite of each other. And the first point is the south node, and that represents something you already know very well. And because you already know it very well, you could have a tendency to get stuck there, or to abide there too fully, or to kind of run away there when the rest of life gets too funny. And then the north node is an area where you're not as familiar when you enter this world, but your soul is really in its purpose trying to embody that energy as well. And so you're spending a lot of time in life reconciling these 2 points. And for you, they are Taurus for the south node and Scorpio for the north node. And they're in your house that deals with community for the south node, and your house that deals with your own creative expression for your north node. So Taurus energy, which is your south node, is the energy of like the total refinement of what is. That's the finished product, right? Like the beautiful garden that's in perfect bloom, the flower blossom. And then Scorpio energy is that same energy, but it's that energy in potential form. So the seed from which the flower will grow. Which is why, of course, Scorpio energy terrifies people, because when we realize we have the potential to grow whatever we want, we realize like, oh, it could go really wrong, right? Or it could go great. As opposed to if someone hands you a flower, you're like, well, maybe it's not the flower I would have made, but at least it's not a dragon, right? Or whatever, some smelly thing or whatever. So for you, your soul in this life is working to be self-directed in your own creativity. And right now, there's this formation that's interacting with the T-square. So it naturally makes what's known as the T-square, which is a challenging formation, to your Chiron, which is the healer.
Interesting.
Speaking of the healing path, he's the wounded healer. So sometimes when you go to Chiron, just like how healing sometimes feels like grieving loss and pain, right? When you first start, you're like, oh, I liked when I was unaware of these things.
There is that.
Chiron's your friend who comes along and is like, don't you want to address that so you can be free? And then he also helps you address it. So for you right now, Saturn is going over your Chiron, Uranus is going over your south node, and Mars is going over your north node. So this is like, not only is that normal in your chart, like Chiron is always going to be directing you. So no wonder you were like, I'd like to spend my life doing a creative approach to healing. That's a perfect example of your lunar nodes interacting with Chiron the way that is. And right now, you might be feeling that even though you're on this path, you have these purposes, that more things to heal in your own life might be cropping up, particularly in the realms of the deep spaces you share with others, right? Familial lines, your own need to be self-directed, to feel safe. And, even though you might heal different layers over and over and over again, they might be popping up right now to have yet another layer sort of examined.
It's interesting because I feel like in terms like of the community of my family, I'm another person with them than I really am. They like me, they love me. I'm their little cousin, but I'm the weird little cousin, if you know what I mean, and it's I've always been, I've always felt this tendency, right? This pull. The people I really am in touch with are other healers. Those are the people that make me happy. You know, share something with me, like you, like things to think about, knowledge, new ideas, new, oh, wow, this is how, oh, this is what that was that I was always feeling that I didn't really know what that was. You know, I sensed it, I felt it in my body, I might have felt it in my heart, but I'm like, oh, and so then it comes up again and again.
Mm-hmm.
And even when I want to share things with people I care about, like in my family, but they're like, yeah, well, that's okay. And then I'm like, oh, do I have to be somebody else to stay in contact with them? Or can I still be this other person?
Your chart would suggest you must be yourself, because the eighth house for you, so the eighth house rules how we get deep with other people, as well as sort of the shared depths of our family dynamic, which can include things as mundane as like, we have a family home together, right? Shared property or something, to things like deeply psychic realms of ancestral healing, right? So there's this big spectrum. And the eighth house also rules how you get deep with anyone. And for you, you have Aquarius there with Chiron in the middle. So for you, anytime you're doing healing work, you're not going to stay surface level, you're going to get deep. And Aquarius energy is the ability to process and transmute the emotional realms of life, which of course relate to your chart ruler, to the mental spheres. So Aquarius energy they can't like not let, I want to say like their freak flag fly. Like they can't not be themselves. It's a very difficult energy to completely articulate because its very nature is innovation and originality. So it's like, of course, in your family, you're going to be more of a original or maybe a bit off the wall, but it's like, you don't want to be on that wall or you would be on that wall. So there's no need to hide. And there's no need to imagine that love won't be present if you're not the same as someone else. And that's a big piece of the Chiron there, is you can actually bring healing to your family, maybe not by doing healer work in the same way that you would do for maybe a client or something, but to just bring them some sort of energy with who you are. Some of the work you're doing, some of the healing you're doing on yourself is also rubbing off on them. And of course, with Chiron there in the eighth house, you might feel more comfortable with healers and want to get deep with those people because they will in turn feed your spirit too.
That's pretty fun, Emily.
It's fun. Saturn there is making it perhaps not fun with the square to Uranus and to Mars. So just be aware, like in this next couple months, right, that if things come up and you're like, oh, surprise from left field, surprise from right field, maybe feelings of frustration or anger or needing to take action bubbling up in you. These are fuels. These are the paradoxical fuels for your creative fire. And ultimately their purpose is to help you have more freedom, more safety around yourself, right? With Saturn in the eighth house, it might be time to make some psychic boundaries where you say, okay, this is how much energy I'm putting into this situation, and then no more, or whatever boundary means for you, right? To build the beautiful house instead of the cage.
It is really interesting, and this thing that you said earlier has been part of what's going on for me. It's like things could just take off, and part of my fear of things taking off is that I'm going to lose a certain amount of freedom in my life, in terms of managing my time, my free time, my schedule, and so then I'm like pulling back so that it doesn't like zoom out of control.
Oh.
Yeah. Is that interesting?
Yeah, you're hiding from your grandchild my advice, just as an astrologer for that, would be, well, to ask yourself the question, do I want this to take off? You do? Then what I would do is imagine a situation where it takes off and your free time, your schedule, everything in life feels great. And then put those things into practice now. Like, don't wait till someone asks you to do way too much, way too often, or wants to pay you something and you don't know what you charge, or, you know, whatever the thing is, don't wait. Lay out the framework now so because with Saturn and Uranus and the moon there, so that you feel good in the structure. And then when someone wants to pour into your cup, you have a cup for them to pour into and not just
Wait, let me get the cup. I know I have it here somewhere.
You're like, I have these 3 cups. You could pour into one of them, but the other times I would be drinking from that cup over there because that's my free time cup or whatever, right? And then you don't just have like a mess of a spilled puddle.
Right. Because there's a piece of me that loves, you know, that place like on the roller coaster right after you go over the hill. That's one of my favorite places in the world, right?
My least favorite place on the roller coaster, so that's good. But I'm glad you enjoy it. Why they make them, I guess.
Well, no, it's kind of interesting, right? I mean, I'm a little bored with the chugging up the hill. Just a little bored with that. It's a lot of, you know, it's pulling the whole train up. But then that moment when it crests the hill and there's that space where you don't know what's going to happen before you fall.
Mm-hmm.
So let me see if I interpreted what you said right. Make a foundation so that I can go over that thing and know that there's a solid foundation underneath.
Right, because you wouldn't like the roller coaster if there was no track after the going up and it just free fell down and then everybody died. Right? Like, it was fun for 1 second and then terror, right? Like the worst thing that could happen. Versus like somebody laid out that thing so that you could have that feeling of freedom, right? And so for you, and you know, in mythology, Saturn and Uranus, right? Uranus and Kronos are father and son. And they are enemies, right? One of them eats the other, and then the other one slices out of his stomach, you know, in true mythology, the way you like. But they're in a battle. And it's because Saturn rules time, boundaries, restriction. And Uranus, who is Uranus, you know, shows up and is like, by the way, time is an illusion and freedom is all there is, right? And they're both true, right? We are embodied beings. Time is a illusion that we use often, right?
It's an agreed upon construct is what I like to say.
Right, which by the way, astrology is the only basis humanity has for time.
Cool. That seems like that would be like a whole nother talk.
Oh yeah. Well, you know, like, how did we get the concept of a year? It was the sun. How did we get the concept of a month? It was the moon. Day and night is literally a construct from astrology, right? So all of these things are very naturally. Anyway, so for you, making a structure has to involve a structure that will give you the freedom you want. But if you don't make a structure, you won't get the freedom. You'll get chaos and somebody else making the structure. So if you want to feel good with the moon there, self-direct the structure. Think about, you know, what would a successful circumstance look like to me in this like new growth period or whatever it is. And then just lay out like, what would I do every day? What would be my ideal schedule? And then put the things in place so that that will happen, right? Put your own boundaries up, you know, whether it's saying, I'm anticipating a time when 30 people want to book me a day, but I don't want to meet with 30 people a day. And so now my scheduler has a limit, or, the things we do for
No,
structure's sake.
it's really interesting, and so now you're going to laugh too. Is I kind of have resisted that as too confining, right? Too structured, too limiting, as opposed to looking at it from the point of view of creating the structure that allows me to have the kind of freedom and creative time I need in my day. And so if I need an hour to write in the morning, then I don't want to start anything until a certain time so that I have that hour to write in the morning. And that's not a limitation, but it is a limitation, because I say I'm not going to do A, B, and C during this time, but it's a freedom because I decide I'm going to do writing during this time.
Right. So something you might do is start by scheduling the things you need for freedom, which sounds, counterintuitive, but that's your grand trine, right? Saying, Laura wants to write every morning. Okay, well, she knows she wants to write in the morning, but if she's booked out her whole morning, she can't write, right? Or if she wakes up and she's like, well, I don't have anything scheduled. What am I going to do? I'm not going to do anything. Well, that's not going to work either, right? You have to say, this is important to me. And so whatever time, that's it. And that's going to give you the freedom. Or if you're like, I want to take a vacation whenever, you have to actually say, okay, well, nobody can book me
during this time because I'm not going to be here.
Right, because I will be on the beach. Otherwise, you'll be that person on the vacation
checking their phone.
Nobody wants to do that. Somebody's like, are you dancing the limbo while you're talking to me? You're like, no, but someone else is. That is the limbo song.
No, that's great. Now, this is really interesting. And I want to touch on the fact that you have created this new course to help people because like I've been familiar with my chart, like somebody plotted it out and gave me a picture of it a long time ago, right? And they told me a few things from the perspective of how they looked at the world and stuff. And I had those ideas and energies that I was working with. And it's very interesting. Your approach is really fluid for me, and kind of like connects things that other people hadn't connected, or you connected in a way that I could hear this time. And so I know you have a new course that you made that is to help people maybe understand better what each house is about and how the energy of where their planets are in relationship to those houses influences their life the way you've been sharing with me with my chart. And we decided to use my chart so that people could see that there are specific things, not taffy-like generic things.
Right. And this was even more, what we've just done with your chart was even more sort of general than normally it might be if we were having a private session and I could perhaps speak a bit more about it. But yes, I'm so excited. So I'm calling it Astrology Academy, and it's a 6-week course that is meant to help people really figure out their charts, and not in a way where you just kind of Google the placements and the internet tells you what a moon in Aries means. But like for you, what does a 10th house 14-degree moon in Aries trining both Uranus and Saturn mean for you, right? So that's an example. And so it's really like, it can get complicated, and that's why people hire astrologers. But the basic principles are so wonderful once you get them in your head and you're able to start using your map. So this is a course that's meant to take people from not knowing astrology or maybe knowing some astrology to actually being fluent and proficient, particularly in their understanding of their own chart, so that if they are listening to an astrologer they enjoy listening to and they're talking about the current situation and the sky map, the current transits, they'll be able to understand how that is affecting them and in what areas of life they might want to focus. So not to toot my own horn, but I do read astrology fluidly, as you said, and I am so in love with what can happen when you do get a grip on your own chart and you can start using it as the map it is, because you can actually influence anything, right? Do you want a happier relationship? Do you want better family dynamics? Do you want to feel like yourself and not like you're getting pushed around all the time? Do you want to have self-autonomy over your finances? Do you want to understand, what you need to do to feel good in life, to have love, to, all of these things, better relationships with your children, your creative life, your body. Anyway, all of these things are in your chart. And so any issue a person is facing, sometimes they go and they find generic advice, right? Generic conventional wisdom from pop psychology, and it can be helpful. But if you find yourself, being offered these advices and being like, well, it still seems like I'm in the same circular pattern. It still seems like the same people, events, circumstances are showing up in my life, and I still feel stuck in this or that circumstance. Astrology can be the thing that helps you realize, oh, for me, I need to do that. And so Astrology Academy is, a lot of my students and clients have been asking for information on how to read their charts in a more robust way than perhaps you might get from a simple Google. And so that's where this has been born from.
Awesome. Well, I'm pretty sure I put a link in the description of the video for people to check out the Astrology Academy and find out when it starts, what it's about, how it works. Mm-hmm. And I just, you just kind of blossom when you talk about it. It's just so fun to see you. And now I have I've been thinking about things, that energy when you feel like you don't have enough time or you're not managing your time well or you can't manage your time well. And a friend of mine, Tom, said, what if you were time? What if you are time? And I'm like, oh, I'm not separate from time. Then today I did a writing workshop with my friend Patricia, and we started out with when I was little, something. And I don't know if she had said to think about time also, but I did. And what I remembered is what you said. When I was very little, I slept when the sun went down and I woke up when the sun came up. I was in time with whatever my body needed. If I got tired in the day, I took a nap. If I was hungry, I ate. It was organic. And then I remember being excited when I learned to tell time, right? But then today I'm thinking, who tells time anything? We use time to constrict ourselves in a way, but it is a construct, like you had said earlier. We agree on this construct so that we can meet for dinner at 6:00 or something, so we can coordinate ourselves. But then this idea, what you said is when you were talking about the planets and I'm like, yeah, that's how I was before I could tell time. I was going with the planetary time, and it felt much nicer. And like even now, when I have one of these days or a few days where I don't have to be anywhere or do anything on a specific time, and I do this thing that I think of as drifting through time. And but it's more in alignment with the sun and the moon than anything else. And I might not look at the clock for 2 days, except maybe to warm up my coffee on my microwave.
Totally. Yeah. I always start classes with the yoga teacher training students by talking to them about, we think of the sun and the moon when we do astrology as these abstract concepts, but really, if you couldn't tell if it were day or night right now, you would be highly disturbed. That's why that whole stereotype of people like walking out of casinos and it's not the time I thought it was, right? Because there were no clocks and they couldn't see the sun. And then they walk outside and they're shocked that it's nighttime, daytime, I don't know, not the time they thought it was. It's alarming. And likewise, like these two luminaries do feed and structure so much of our lives. And it's not, plants that we eat are beings that took sunlight and turned it into edible food for us. Like all of this stuff, like our bodies are composed of stardust and sunlight. And we sometimes forget that, but then it's like when you do, you're like, oh, of course these things would be affecting me. It would be absurd to think otherwise in a certain sense.
Right. It's just like the tide and the moons and the fact that we are so much water. How could we not be changed? I mean, if the entire ocean changes from where the moon is, how could we imagine that our bodies wouldn't also respond in some way to that?
Yeah, the moon is our magnetism.
Yeah. This is just so fun, Emily. Just so fun. I just feel like I could talk to you for hours. So in your 6-week course, I mean, like, so you have people in there and so everybody has a different chart and everybody has there will probably, I would imagine that whoever ends up in your course there will be some similarities, like a family pod. There will be something energetically that brings the people together.
I do find, I don't say this very much in readings because I believe that readings are about the client. But I do, like, I know my chart inside and out. And so I'm often pleasantly surprised at my clients who come back time and time again, how compatible we are. I'm always like, oh, of course we get along. Like we have all these resonances, often with my Mercury or something in terms, or my ascendant in terms of like who I actually am or how I communicate, right? Because that's what I'm doing with clients, which of course is different than like compatibility you would look for in a relationship or something. But so often people who show up in my courses or my life, because I am looking at their charts often, I'm like, oh yeah, there is this sort of compatibility there in terms of communication style, curiosity towards certain things, right? And it makes sense. Like you're not going to take an astrology course if you are not interested in astrology.
Right. Well, Kathleen Wesselman is watching, and she said this was so interesting. I want to ask, Kathleen, do you have any questions that you would like to ask? Because I think if you type it in the comments, might be able to see them.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, see, and I would call it energetic alignments. In my work, like you're saying how you see these compatibilities, and I would think of them as energetic alignments. Not the same necessarily, but that they go side by side in an interesting way, or they intersect in an interesting way that makes for growth and learning.
Exactly. They are energetic alignments, which all of the placements are energetic to you, right? And so, yeah, people usually don't take courses from people they don't resonate with, or they don't, so on some level, that's why. And I know like there are different vibes for astrologers. There are some who are kind of spooky, and there are some who are mysterious, and there are some who are, I don't know, other things, bubbly, fun. And I'm sort of whatever I am, which I think is just like, I will educate you for the full extent. I have a background in academics, so I will extrapolate some points. And my passion is taking the esoteric and making it accessible for people who didn't study it for 20 years.
Right. Oh, Kathleen says she hasn't ever had her chart read, but she thinks it sounds interesting. And I will tell you, Kathleen, it's interesting at different times of your life. I've lived my whole life with this energy, right? Sometimes successfully, sometimes not so successfully. And still, and maybe 1, 2, 3. This might be the third time I've had somebody kind of really dive into my chart for me. And now I'm thinking, well, what if I dived into my chart for myself? How would that be different than somebody else's interpretation?
There's a lot more gold to mine in your chart. So we only touched what I would consider the shallowest first sort of glimmer of it, right? Like my readings are an hour and 15 minutes. And those even, most people come back many, many times. Some people just come once because they're just, curious. But when you read your own chart, you're going from someone else, who's me in this case, telling you a series of energetic possibilities, to taking it into your own awareness of the actual circumstances of your life, right? Because I don't know the concrete circumstances, say with your family dynamics or your community dynamics or your self-creative dynamics, right? Which would be that T-square we discussed. But you do. And so you can sit there and be like, this thing happened with my cousin, or this thing happened with my community, some very specific thing, which of course in a private reading, you might tell me about certain things, but then you could start to see, and what we didn't get into today is not just the fact that, it's neat, these things line up, but the fact that these lines in the chart mean something. And what they mean is the energetic pathway for you to solve that problem or to solve that situation, to show up authentically as you, and what the different things are that you would need to grapple with to sort of get through the situation in a way that remained authentic to you while honoring each person.
Yeah. It's also interesting because over the last 6 weeks or so, one of the things I have been aware of is that I'm happiest when I'm making things. Whether it's cooking, just making a recipe, or knitting a blanket for a friend's baby, or it can be anything. But I thought to myself that I needed to allow time every day to make something. And just thinking about what I have in my mind from the whole thing we talked about today is that's some of that important energy.
It is. Your North Node is highly important. And sometimes people neglect their 5th house. And the 5th house, by the way, rules children as well as play. All forms of play, right? From joyful, creative play to debauchery to right, all the plays. But the 5th house is often neglected because I think in society today, there's often a dismissal of the arts, particularly the arts that we aren't proficient at. So it's one thing if you're a professional ballerina, but they're the people who get to dance. And if you're just having fun in your kitchen dancing around, that's sort of the societal message. Astrology would say something different, and particularly your chart would suggest your most important purpose is to reclaim the inner child who needs to play, to reclaim and protect, and then proclaim, right? Let that kid out. Let that kid have its recess, right?
Right. Oh, this is really, really fun. So also in the description is Emily's website, and everything she has and does is on her website. You can find all the information because she is an expert. And so she also lines up the information for you to find easily and clearly. Do reach out. If you put comments on these videos, we'll reach back to you, comment back, and answer questions. And Emily, I thank you so much for your time. It was just fun. It was really fun. It was like playing.
Good. That's what we both need. Thank you so much for having me on. And as always, like, I think what you're doing is amazing. And I think that, you know, by energetic resonance, the people who connect with you must be also doing amazing things. So lots of blessings and love on this eclipse day.
Yes, thank you so much. And I'll see you. We'll see you again. I'm sure you'll have something more new and special, and we'll just bring it in to bring you back in again, maybe every 6 months or so, just for fun.
I'd love to come back.
So take care, Emily.
You too.